See what it looks like?
You want the bar on my back or just regular?
Just regular.
So when I teach a squat, it's always shoulder width or slightly outside.
Okay.
Toes slightly out.
Okay.
All right.
Wipe that clear.
Wipe that clear?
Here's why.
Okay.
Everyone's pelvis has a different size, a different shape, and different orientation. So remember I said, like, you'll see people have a big flared up rib cage. Well, what did I say that does to the pelvis? It does this, right? And so if I say someone has a flat rib cage, like a caved rib cage is down, it does this with the pelvis. Right. Change the orientation. Some people will have one pelvis is here, one pelvis is here, based on just they'll be rotated. So what I'm looking for is like, okay, where is this person's pelvis right now? What's the orientation of kind of the acetabulum? So again, these pants suck, but like, so if I go to here, I can go to 90 degrees. If I come out here, I can go a lot further. Just because like that's kind of where my pelvis opens. Yeah. So I'll always have somebody assess like, hey, where do you get the best range of motion at your pelvis? I'm like, okay, well for me it's like here. So then I want my feet to match that. So my natural squatting position is there. So if I go,
you've got a little bit wider stance, yeah.
Well, it's just what my hips naturally orient to. So there's no benefit to being here over being here.
So there's really no set position per athlete.
Never.
It's what the athlete is based on.
Right, it's based on their structure.
Right.
Yeah. So if I say someone to squat here and their hips should be naturally externally rotated, it's going to push them into this position, probably cause knee problem, push them into an overpronated foot, right? And so the old paradigm in bodybuilding was like, well, Tom Platt squatted like this, therefore that must be the best way to do it. Which the only reason that's the best way for him is because of his mechanics. So really short femur, really long lower leg, right? So the length from my hip to my knee relative to the length from my knee to the floor, those like proportions, is going to determine how I squat. So if you get someone with a really long femur, they're going to squat like this.
I was just about to tell you that. I've noticed that over the years, the femur length has a big role.
Massive, massive.
Yeah.
So that's why we use these wedges, right? So I would get these. I think Watson's making them now. Okay. So what this is going to do, man, depending on your height, it changes that relative length to the floor. So we can change your lever lengths, right? So it's like if someone has a long femur, I have people who I put on wedges like this. Like, okay, we're going to squat like this because it allows them to stay up. Right? So if I do this, that's my squat. If I do this, look where I can stay vertical, right, with my spine. So that's effectively how you look at it. So if I squat here versus here versus here, it's just changing the relative elevation of my heel, and I slide a wedge under there, and I can change the orientation of my spine.
Now, how do you feel about the knee passing the toe?
It's completely fine, man. It's such an old paradigm. Okay. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with the knee passing your toe. The only time that starts to become a problem is if you get like, 65-year-old Grandma Sue who's never had her knee over her toe, and you go, hey, Grandma, we're going to take it from here, and we're going to go way out here. That's a huge amount of change, right? So if I say, here's a simple mechanical thing for you to think about. So if I'm doing a 100-pound dumbbell press, and I'm pressing it, so if I'm laying on my back, my hand is directly over my elbow, and I'm pressing. So the one thing that people don't understand about exercise is people look at load as being the only variable. The other variable that has equal amount of weight is distance.
You're right.
So if I say, let's say, my hand is directly over my elbow, let's call the distance from my elbow to my shoulder 12 inches, arbitrary, 12 inches. Right. So I'm doing 100 pounds times 12 inches of distance. So it's about 1,200 foot-pounds of torque. That's the measurement. Right. So if I say I do 10 reps perfectly there, and then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go 110 pounds. So I'm increasing the resistance, but I do this. And
the angle changes.
Well, say I decrease the relative distance from my shoulder by 2 inches. Right. So instead of 12 inches was here, I went to here. So it's 2 inches less. Right. So I've got 110 pounds, but I've got 20%. So I've increased by 10% in the weight, but 20% less distance. Right. More weight or less weight, or less work.
Right. Anything coming closer,
because you're changing the distance.
Right.
So it's literally, so if you're doing an equation for torque, which is how we measure in exercise, we measure torque. You're measuring mass, which is load, times distance. So, effectively resistance times distance. So if the distance is decreasing, but even if the load is going up, it's actually less torque at the muscle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
So with this stuff, if someone's never had, so if I'm standing here, right there, all my mass is stacked through my center of mass, right? As soon as I do this, now the muscles that are kind of far away from that center of mass are doing work. Here I'm stacked through my skeletal structure. If I do this, now all those muscles that cross my hip and maybe my knee are doing some work, right? So the further distance my hip is away from that center of mass, the more those muscles have to work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
So if I squat and I do this, now my knees are way out in front of the center of mass, they're doing more work because they're further away from that distance. If I do this, now it's way more distance, right? So I wouldn't take someone from here who's never been more than 4 inches away from their center of mass out here and be like, okay, now we're going to be 12 inches out in front because I just tripled their amount of work, right? So 4 inches of distance versus 12 inches of distance is really triple the work.
A lot of load.
So I wouldn't take you from like, hey, you've never been this far in front of your center of mass to this. But adding your foot going or your knee going over your toe, there's nothing wrong with it. Like, what if you're walking in a parking lot and you just do this? Like, is your knee gonna explode? Like, no, you gotta fucking train it, otherwise, like, it's weak.
Right.
So we wanna go like, hey, where are you weak, and how do I make it stronger? So just think of it like graded exposure, man. Like, if I've never done it, let's just move you out like an inch.
Right.
And it's important to know that because, like, if you want someone to build their quads, here's a good example. If I'm squatting and I want to build my quads, and I squat this way, and I could, here I could squat 315. Here I'm not going to go any further and tear my pants. 405, 5, whatever, 500 pounds, and I'm like, man, I train so hard, I squat so hard, I can't build my quads. Well, because the more weight you put on, you're still using this. Whereas if I just did this, and at 315, instead of doing more weight on my back and just staying here, I just did this, and I just did this, and I just did this, and I wouldn't do it with I would use a wedge. I wouldn't let my heel come up.
You still want heel stability.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just progressing the amount of challenge to my quad now, right? So rather than having to put more weight on my back, which is not always the goal, I'm actually increasing the amount of work my quad is doing by just challenging the distance a little bit more.
Right.
Does that make sense?
I've never applied that necessarily to the body weight squat, just due to now you're telling me the risk of injury for knee overpassing the toe.
Zero. The only time there is risk of knee going over the toe if this is happening.
Right. Never inside.
Right.
Always here.
Yeah. So we want to make sure we have stability through the foot and it's going over the baby toe.
Right.
Right. So that's. I mean, if you go in here, and you're gonna have clients, man. I've got this one client who came to me and he would squat like this.
Oh.
And I'm like, dude, how are your knees? He goes, fine. I go, are you sure? Yeah, they're fine.
How was his adductors?
We fixed them since. It was his feet that were fucked. But like, he's like, yeah, no, they don't hurt. And I was like, okay, they're going to, so we're gonna fix you. But like, if it feels okay for now, with a small amount of weight, like we're training the muscles because we're trying to get him to be able to use his feet. But you're gonna have people, man, who are just mechanically fucking anomalies.
What are your thoughts about? So I've worked with powerlifters. I've worked with almost every athlete you can think of.
Yep.
So for the powerlifter guys, they tend to have this more kind of, they shoot the hips back and they kind of have more of this position versus this position.
Right. Well, so the ideal position as far as force output is, let's go in this classroom for a second. Okay, so that's here's some torque equations. Okay, so
I'm about to get that off the back of your head, man. Were you laying on the floor?
yeah, thank you, thank you. Yeah, we were laying outside doing the breath work.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Okay, so if I squat, these proportions, right? So that is almost even. This one's a little bit longer than that one. So obviously that's a hip, that's a head. So it's been suggested that the ideal ratio, so if we go, let's say, let me do it correctly to scale so it's not. So the normal scale would be, the weight would go through your neck.
Correct.
So the weight will be here somewhere and it'll go straight down through your foot. So let me fix that again. All right, so it'll go through the middle of your foot. So that's a relatively upright body. So that would be, well, again, the mechanics or the proportions here are incorrect. But
No, I got it, yeah.
so the ideal scenario is this load is going somewhere between, so if we broke this into thirds, so that distance, they call that, the distance from here to here. Let's say it's, 18 inches total. and you can break it into thirds, so like 6, 6, and 6. The ideal scenario is you'd want that weight about 1/3 of the way from the knee.
Okay.
So that would look, you know, so if I would, that would look something. Oh,
right. So let me ask you this, Ben. Because this is throughout my coaching career, I learned angles, and I always said angle of activation. So meaning wherever the load was going, that angle was where the muscle would be targeting. So if I wanted to hit the front delt, or verse sides, or verse rears, or a decline, a press, it's wherever the angle was where the load was hitting. So if I have the load here and it's coming down here, is this going to be the most load right here?
No, not in that case.
Okay.
So the way I would frame it is like.
So if we went, like you said, getting up in your toes and putting a wedge and putting the knees out here, is that going to engage more of the inside of the quad?
I'm a lefty, so I'm going to right on there. So here's the way I would look at it, and I look at it from perspective of distance. So if I know, let's say I've got 400 pounds on my back.
Okay.
So the load is 400 pounds. So the equation for torque is equal to force times distance. Right, so all equations in exercise is torque. So most people will say force. You know, you hear this a lot. Force equals mass times acceleration,
Okay.
And that's what people will say, which is correct. But force is only a half of the equation. The other half is distance. So mass times acceleration is what most people will quote. Anyway, so point being, if we know my force in this case is going to be, we don't know the acceleration, but we'll say the force is 400 because that's the mass, times distance. So in this case, the distance from the knee is 6 inches. So it's 6 inches. So it's 2,400. What's called foot pounds of torque.
Okay.
So the relative challenge at that quad is going to be 2,400 foot-pounds of torque, whereas the relative challenge to the hip is going to be double that because it's going to be 400 pounds times 12. So it's 4,800 foot-pounds of torque. So if I change the relative distance and I put a wedge under my heel, and I put a, let's say, wedge under my heel, so this then increases the distance, the same relative height of the wedge, so maybe 3 inches. So now my knee comes out 3 further inches. Now that's 9, right? Because however much I could elevate it 4 or 5 inches, like one's relatively small. So now that significantly changes that. So this, instead of being 6, is 9. So now we're looking at 3,600 foot-pounds of torque just by changing 3 inches. So that's how that works. I wouldn't necessarily say, because you're like, oh, it changed. It's the relative point of like it's going to hit this part of the quad versus this part of the quad. That won't work for this specific.
It's crazy.
Instance.
Just that angle pitch right there can make that much more, that much more force without even increasing weight.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah,
huge. And so you can vary it even more, right? So if we did, let's say we had someone keep a relatively vertical torso. Right, so let's say they had a big wedge and the feet end here, but so we put a big wedge under their heel.
Right.
So they're keeping a relatively vertical torso angle. The bar is going through like back here somewhere. So that amount of distance is huge.
Yeah, that's almost going to be your full, which was, what was it, 6, 8, 12? Or
yeah. So if we, depending on if that's 18 inches.
Oh, no, it's 18, yeah.
Yeah, so then it's the opposite, right? So this is 6, this is 12. I mean, you don't know, you have to measure it, but relative. And now if you say it's still 400 pounds, which would be huge weight, now it's 4,800 pounds of torque, So it's just significant, man. Yeah.
That's crazy, man.
So instead of having to increase the weight, and that's what people miss, man. It's just like, there's only half the equation. And again, all these people are like, oh, you just fucking lift heavy. I'm like, yeah, dude, but what are you doing with the distance? You see all these guys who come into really heavy presses and they're in here, like, dude, you did nothing for your chest. So if I have a 100-pound weight and it's pushing me down through my shoulder, if it's stacked through my shoulder, it's like holding it here. I could hold it there all day. As soon as I do this, even 1 inch, now it's harder. If I go way out here, it's a huge difference. So if I'm holding this and I'm using 200-pound dumbbell, I can hold there all day. As soon as I move, it's a different thing. So if people are pressing directly where their hand, the weight is directly over their shoulder, their pec is doing nothing. Their tricep in the front delt is doing everything. So it's just mechanically understanding that shit. Yeah, sure. Like a dirty kid.
That's cool, man.
Yeah, so that's important to know. So again, that applies to anything. So it applies to a chest press, right? So if I'm doing here, I have these 100-pound dumbbells, and if I decrease by an inch or two, I'm decreasing the torque. If I increase by an inch or two, I'm increasing the torque. So if you have someone who's doing 100-pound dumbbells and doing it perfectly, like, oh, I want to go heavier. Wait, instead of going heavier at first, I just want you to take like a half an inch outside of your hands. Like that extra half an inch, it could increase the amount of torque by 10%. And that's going from 1,000 pounds to 1,100 pounds. That's a lot.
And that's just this angle change here.
Right.
Then we still have elbow positioning too as well.
Can vary the distance from the shoulder for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But so elbow positioning, I don't vary a huge amount, because if we start getting up here, you can compromise the bicep tendon.
I always thought too that's major risk for that front delt too. That stress and strain there.
Yeah. So again, down here is not a pec exercise, right?
No.
Yeah. So it's like, how high can you get without compromising the shoulder?
Right. But once again, too, when you look to the origin to insertion for the pec, if we're down here, literally that fiber is running
Around the corner.
Yeah, around here.
Yeah. So the pec insertion is here. So if you're pressing this way, it's literally just the front delt thing.
Right.
Yeah. Here's what I would do. The only time, so the other part of that equation, mass times acceleration.
Right.
Acceleration can shoot those numbers up really high. So get rid of acceleration, right? So when you add acceleration on top of it, it fucks everything up, because that's when people get hurt. So typically what people do is they'll I feel good, and then I'm gonna fall.
Right.
And then that acceleration piece shoots the number of torque through the roof. So we gotta keep that acceleration number low. Okay, so what does that look like? Well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to contract your muscles, not you, but so I say to a client, I just want you to be controlled. What does it feel like to control? To know if I said stop at any point, you would stop. So if I'm going here, stop, right? So you're like, okay, now I'm in control, and stop at the bottom, stay there for a few seconds and come back up. So if you show that you're in control, you just knock those acceleration numbers down. The torque doesn't go through the roof, and they aren't getting hurt.
Right.
You can also control muscle damage that way too.
One thing I try to teach or just tell my clients is always generate force through the range of motion. That way, at any time, if I say up, you're ready to go.
Right.
There's never a point where we lose control.
Yeah. So control is the currency, man. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So let's use that wedge and see what it looks like. So the depth is good, or the width is good?
Ball of the toe still stays on the... That feels real good.
Different, right?
Yeah, that feels really good. Man, that's night and day difference.
Let's try this one, it'll be even better. Right? So now I can make that even a little bit better. Just hold that in your hands out in front of your body.
Are these those prime wedges? Mm-hmm. You want me to extend it out? Or...
So even just 10 pounds, you're a big guy, but 10 pounds, all it's doing is activating your entire posterior chain. So everything, all the spinal column now has to stay erect. It's going to keep your body more erect and just allow you to kind of bend into that squat.
That also takes, when I did my squat here,
Yep.
I had some pain in my knee. That's
Gone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
completely gone. Are you big with full extension and contracting glutes and pushing the hips?
No. So again, right there's no more tension, right?
Right.
So bodybuilding is about tension, so I don't want to lose tension. So if it's powerlifting, I'm trying to like force through.
Right.
Bodybuilding, I'm stopping here. Like there's no benefit to me, because here if I'm standing straight up, all my load is stacked through my skeletal structure, right? My skeleton. There's no benefit. And as soon as I start to deviate that, now the muscular system's kicking in, right? So I want the muscular system to work. Okay. I don't ever want to relax.
So a lot of that came from when I went through all the CrossFit stuff. Even like learning a correct kettlebell movement with the hip opening the hips up.
It's not wrong,
Yeah.
because it's a different thing, right? So they're hoping for triple extension, which is better for the nervous system and building strength. But bodybuilding, I'm like, hey, I'm worried about, like, I want to keep tension on the muscle.
Consistent tension, yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so talking about your hip back thing, here's what's happening. So if I start here, and we'll call it neutral pelvis, right? So pelvis is call it like look at like a soup bowl. So if I go this way, so I'm opening up to the front. So these muscles are shortening, these muscles are lengthening, right? This gets longer, this gets shorter. So if I do this to start, I'm shortening these muscles right away. And as soon as I start falling into that squat, these ones are gonna run out of room. They can't shorten anymore, right? These are lengthened, these are shortened. I'm not even halfway down the rep. So where does the range have to happen if it keeps going? It goes into butt wink for most people, right? So if I start in a neutral pelvis and I just sit into it, I can keep a neutral spine much longer and I don't go into a butt wink as early. So you look at people who have like tight hips or tight lower back, and setting them into this position is gonna exacerbate that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be, so one thing too with teaching the squat as far as the upright chest, I've always been told wherever the chest is, the hips follow. So if you have upright chest, the hips follow. Have you ever heard anything like that?
Explain what that means.
So meaning if I was to do what you just did here, see how my,
Yeah.
So this right here.
So I'm not asking you, no, so I'm not asking you to do this.
Okay.
So it's just like, if I want to be able to move like
So it's
my
just a
pelvis.
pelvic tilt.
Yeah, yeah, that's it.
Gotcha.
And we're trying to get in a neutral pelvis.
Right.
So I don't want to be anterior or posterior. Like certainly don't want to start in a posterior tilt. It's going to be neutral. And most people walk around anterior, right? Most people walk around like this.
Okay.
So I just want to go, okay, if this is where you're starting, this is kind of your default, I just want to bring in neutral. So that's neutral for me. And if I can stay there, squat. So the reason that you think about this, think about the pelvis and the rib cage as a column. Okay. So for the pelvis and the rib cage to work most effectively as a column, it has to be stacked. My rib cage is literally directly over my pelvis, and most people are doing this. So now these muscles are short, these muscles are lengthened, they're not able to do what they're meant to do. So if I stack them, now this thing can literally just work like a column, like a soda can. If I were to stand on top of a soda can, I could stand on it. As soon as I like push in one side, it goes, okay. So that's the same thing that happened here. If I can keep these two things stacked, my rib cage is over my pelvis, I can literally stack thousands of pounds and it won't break. Nothing will happen. So that's kind of the safety and the strength and stability. Okay. Yeah, so that's the logic. So as soon as I do this, right, as soon as I do this, these muscles are no longer able to work as effectively. These aren't able to work as effectively. And now I'm just trying to depend on my passive structures, my skeletal system. So remember, a muscle is always weak in its shortest position, its lengthened position. Mid-range, it's strong, right? So if I put these muscles into their short position by doing this, these are short, these are lengthened, these are lengthened. So these are weaker by definition, these are weaker by definition, right? Slightly.
Right.
How much doesn't matter, but they're not in their ideal position to generate force.
Okay.
So we just want to, the longer we can keep someone in kind of a neutral spinal position, the better.
Got it.
Yeah. Now I'll say this. If I'm training an athlete, a fighter, or a powerlifter, this is the next level thought. So the statement I just said is like we want to keep them in the neutral position as often as possible is correct for most people. If I'm training someone who's a pro athlete or a fighter or a powerlifter, I intentionally introduce positions of weakness, meaning I know you're going to be really shit here. I know you're going to be really shit here. So therefore, I'm going to train that because if you ever get to that position in a lift or in a football, whatever game, like I need to be strong there. So that's a high level thought process. But first, you got to be good at the basic stuff, and then you start stacking the additional thoughts on top of it. Yeah. So let's try a couple of these because I want you to get it. A few little cues that I think you can take home that your clients will hate you for. So a little wider, yeah. Good, so try that.
All right.
Good, now, perfect, stay there. Now I want you to, instead of coming up, I want you to push the floor down as hard as you can, like the floor is moving, almost like it's a leg press. Yeah, okay. So do that again. Push into the floor as hard as you can, but don't move. I want you to stay there. Just shove into the floor as hard as you can, but don't let yourself come up. Just let yourself come up about 3 inches by pushing a little bit harder. A little harder, a little harder, a little harder. Good. Now use your hamstrings to pull you down. So the hamstrings actively pull you down. Good. Now shove into the floor hard through your foot. Come back up a little further, a little further, a little further. Push, push, push. Now use the hamstrings to pull you down. So we're doing about a 6-inch rep. Shove into the floor as hard as you can, like you're trying to leg press the floor. So we're not coming back up. We're pushing the floor down. Yeah, push through the floor, push through the floor, push through the floor. Good. Now down with the hamstrings. Don't let it fall. Pull it down. Push. Nice. Push. Good. So no weight, but you're lighting it up, right? So that's a contraction.
Dude, just
based.
Just the mind muscle of just knowing how to generate force with no load at all is.
Dude, and the amount of progress you can make with clients, teaching them that, is tremendous. Because now when you put a weight on their back, your goal should be scaling their ability to contract like that with incrementally more weight. Right. So it's like, hey, let's go to 400-pound squat. No. Let's go to 50 pounds first. Yeah. Right. And then let's do that. And then if we can, because like if you really want to get results, doing that with progressively more load is going to be way more beneficial. You need something, Rachel? What? Did you need me? No, you're good. Come here. You're good. Just as long as we're gonna leave all your clothes on for the videos this time?
It's too fucking cold.
Ooh, shit. Man, pushing into the floor.
Big difference, yeah?
Lights.
Now do the same. Yeah, now do the same with deadlifts. So now remember we said this distance thing with deadlifts? So if that's as far as I can go back on a deadlift, what if I were to lift my toes up like a few inches? See how much further I can take my hips back? That's really what you're doing here. So you're increasing the horizontal distance. Move them up a little more. Yeah, like just your heels on the ground, a little further. There you go. Good, so now see how far you can drive your hips back. When you get to the bottom of the rep, think about the same thing. Drive those heels into the ground hard, but don't move. Yeah, there you go, that's fine. Drive the heels in the ground, but don't move. So you contract the glutes. Now use that contraction to create motion.
Oh. Geez, that's even stretching my calf.
Yep.
Do my knees need to be locked?
Well, I know your hamstrings are tight, man. So the way I would think about it, instead of giving you an answer, give you a thought process. If your knees are bent, it's more glute. If your knees are straighter, it's more hamstring.
More hamstring, right?
Yeah. So.
Oh yeah. So that's pretty much max right there.
Okay. Yeah, man. I mean, I would still do it. Just do like little. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to work on this when I get back home.
Actually, do this, man. Do this other way. Just one. I mean, the same thing, but I want you to put your hands on there. So, like you're doing a deadlift, not like you do the bar. I would really want you to have your hands on the bar.
Here?
Yep. Same position. See if you can drive the hips back a little bit. Good. Now, which leg was it that tore?
This one, my right one.
Okay, so lift the left leg off the ground.
Just
Yep, and put it behind you, like kick it back. Yep, kick it back further, kick it back straight if you can. Good. Now, drop this hip down toward the ground. Perfect.
Woo.
Yeah, there you go.
Wow.
So that would be a position that I would explore for you and try to get strong and stable there. Can you kick this leg back up higher? Can you take a little bit of weight off your hands? Yeah, and trying to load through that foot. Pull your toes up on that right foot. Yep. Pay attention to how the foot is loaded. Now, can you take this foot up a little higher? So contract this glute. Pull your toes up toward you, like the other way. Pull them, yeah, there you go. Straighten that leg as much as you can. Good, drop this hip back down toward the ground. There, nice, yep, there you go. So really lengthen out that glute. So now use this adductor to contract down towards your knee. So you're almost like trying to pull, yeah, there you go. It's like actually trying to contract in the adductor. Feel that?
Yeah, yeah.
Good. Yeah. Can I try the other side?
Holy shit.
So you're just trying to differentiate movement from hip to hip, right? So when you get injured, sometimes your body starts to wire movements together. Mm-hmm. So you want to delineate between the left and the right hip, and this is a really good way to do it. So yeah, working toward like trying to get this up, so almost to where your body is parallel with the ground and this is parallel with the ground. You're not there yet, but that work toward that, and drop the hip down. Yep. So you contract in this glute, and now don't forget to use that adductor to kind of contract down on it.
Ooh. Man, that's a damn good stretch.
Yeah, so most people, when they go into that type of stretch, they'll open up their hips. Mm-hmm. So just by locking the hip down a little bit, it lengthens that glute med and also really gives you an opportunity to contract on that adductor, like using it to pull down.
I love learning new mobility stuff. For actually a full year, I studied Kelly Starrett.
Oh, nice.
A lot of band stuff. A lot of band for opening up hips.
Yeah, Kelly's great. I just had him on the podcast. He's awesome. Okay, so now let's take these thought processes and apply them to a lunge. So if I said I want you to do a quad dominant versus a glute dominant lunge, what does that look like?
Shorter step. Really?
So forget about the typical sound bites you hear, and think about the joints.
Okay.
So if I want to train my bicep, I need this joint to go through its greatest excursion. If I want to train my pec, I need this joint to go through its greatest excursion. If I want to train my quad, I need this joint to go through its greatest excursion. If I want to train my glute, I need this joint to go through its greatest excursion. So if I'm trying to train my glute, and people go, you got to go ass to grass. Well, no, man. Like the only thing I'm worried about is this joint going through its full excursion. That's as far as I can physically go at that joint. So that means that's as far as that glute will ever lengthen. For me to go any further down, the motion's happening at different joints. So if I'm trying to train my glute in a lunge, or if I'm trying to train my quad in a lunge, I'm just worried about that one particular joint and how much force I'm putting through that thing. So like force is the distance piece. Yeah. So if I want to train my glute in a lunge, it's this joint that I'm worried about. So I'm thinking about, okay, is that as far back as I can? Is this fully shortened? And like, that's it, right? Now I'm trying to train my quad, it's this. It's like, how far can I get I can't go any further because I'm tearing my pants, but how far can I get my hip to my heel, right? So that's how I want you to think about it. Think joint by joint rather than like what's the big picture. Eliminate the big picture, go like much deeper. So example being, if I'm trying to train my lat on a pull-up, people are like, I just want to get my chest to the bar. Well, that can happen here, or that can happen here. It's a very different thing, right? So how much did this joint change versus this joint? So if I'm doing a pull-up, or say a pull-down, and I pull it toward me this way, I finish the rep, but my bicep and my elbow flexors do the work. If I do it this way, my lat did the work. Right? It's a very different thing. It's not just about moving the weight, not how much weight is on there. It's like which joint is actually doing the work, or which muscle is actually doing the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you prefer like walking or stationary?
Depends. It's different.
Depends on what the goal we're trying to
Yeah. So for quad, I like to do stationary. For glute, I like to do walking. So if you think about, like, if I'm at the bottom of a squat or bottom of a lunge, my glute will do this and extend me that way. So it's like propelling me forward. Whereas if I'm at the bottom of a lunge, my quad wants to just extend and like push me up. Right. So I tend to do that.
So it's once again, it's just like the angles on the drawing board. Same thing with the lunge.
Oh yeah.
Wherever we're at here versus even a lunge here where my knee is really far back behind my toe.
Yeah, it's all glute.
Totally. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So thinking through things like that.